go through more stuff as it comes out. We went through the Jack Smith report as well, so if you haven't seen that, go ahead and look that up. It is a doozy as well. I write separately to explain as succinctly as I can the theoretical nuts and bolts of what exactly the majority has done today to alter the paradigm of accountability for presidents of the United States. I also address what that paradigm shift means for our nation moving forward. I swear everything takes a while. Dealing with phones and shit and audio shit. Forgive me. We will get it fixed one day. I do think. I know. Moving on, part 1. To fully appreciate the profound change the majority has wrought, one must first acknowledge what it means to have immunity from criminal prosecution. Put simply, immunity is, quote, exemption, unquote, from the duties and liabilities imposed by the law. Black's Law Dictionary, 898, 11th edition, 2019. See Hopkins v. Clemson, 221, U.S. 636, 643, 1911, explaining that immunity is, quote, exemption from legal process, end quote. In its purest form, the concept of immunity boils down to a maxim, quote, the king can do no wrong, end quote. A notion that was firmly, quote, rejected at the birth of our republic, end quote. Clinton v. Jones, 520 U.S. 681, 697, number 24, 1997, quoting. W. Blackstone, Commentaries 246, see United States v. Burr. Damn, they going back for all the classics. 1807. To say that someone is immune from criminal prosecution is to say that, like a king, he, quote, is not under the coercive power of the law, end quote, which, quote, will not suppose him capable of committing a folly, much less a crime, end quote. For Blackstone, star 33. Thus, being immune is not like having a defense under the law. Rather, it means that the law does not apply to the immunized person in the first place. Conferring immunity, therefore, quote, creates a privileged class free from liability for wrongs inflicted or injuries threatened, end quote. Hopkins 221, U.S. 643. We're just talking about how it is, guys. Moving on. It is undisputable, that was terrible. It is indisputable that immunity from liability for wrongdoing is the exemption rather than the rule in the American criminal justice system. That is entirely unsurprising, for the very idea of immunity stands in tension with foundational principles of our system of government. It is a core tenet of our democracy that the people are the sovereign and the rule of law is our first and final security. Quote, from their own experience and their deep reading in history, the founders knew that law alone saves a society from being rent by internet. I'm gonna get a little pronunciation. We're gonna boom. This is what it's all about. You're watching how the sausage gets made right here. Let's get a little
internecine.
Internecine. I would have not hit that. Society from being rent by internecine strife or ruled by mere brute power, however disguised, end quote. United States v. Mine Workers, 330 U.S. 258, 308, 1947. Frankfurter J. concurring in judgment. Let's see how we're doing here. 10 minutes into the stream. Hi, everybody. How we doing? We're moving on with Justice Jackson's dissenting opinion, starting at a corollary. A corollary to that principle sets the terms for this case. Quote, no man in this country is so high that he is above the law. No officer of the law may set that law at defiance with impunity. All the officers of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to obey it. End quote. United States v. Lee, 106 U.S. 196 220, 1882. So they are just bringing back all the precedent that the majority is stomping all over in this opinion. We have long lived with the collective understanding that, quote, decency, security, and liberty alike demand that government officials shall be subjected to the same rules of conduct that are commands to the citizen, end quote. For, quote, in a government of laws, existence of the government will be imperiled if it fails to observe the law scrupulously, end quote. So, do the shit right. Otherwise, they'll come back to get you. Quoting Olmstead v. United States 277 U.S. 438, 485, 1928. Brandeis J. Dissenting. Continuing with Part 2A. These foundational presuppositions are reflected in a procedural paradigm of rules and accountability that operates in the realm of criminal law, what I would call an individual accountability model. The basic contours of that model are familiar because they manifest in every criminal case. Criminal law starts with an act of the legislature, which holds the power, quote, to define a crime and ordain its punishment, end quote. United States v. Wiltberg, 5, we 76, 95, 1820. Accord, Ohio v. Johnson, 467 U.S., 493, 499, 1984. Criminal statutes are laws of general applicability that express, quote, the assent of the people's representatives, end quote, that certain conduct is off limits in our society. Wooden v. United States, 595 U.S., 360, 391, 2022. Gorsuch J. concurring in judgment. Damn, quoting his own shit back at him. Eat it, and it didn't sway him a bit. If we get more people interested, we can always go through the full document, but this dissenting stuff is insane. If you're joining us for the first time, these are some doozies. When the federal government believes that someone has run afoul of a criminal statute and decides to exercise its prosecutorial discretion to pursue punishment for that violation, it persuades a grand jury that there is probable cause to indict. U.S. Constitution Amendment 5. Then the government marshals evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant engaged in the prohibited conduct and possessed the requisite state of mind. See United States v. Bailey, 444, U.S. 394, 402, 1980. Quoting, observing that to hold a person criminally liable, quote, the concurrence of, another quote, an evil-meaning mind and an evil-doing hand, end all quotes, must be proved, quoting Morissette v. United States, 342 U.S., 246, 251, 1952. For his part, the defendant, quote, stands accused but is presumed innocent until conviction upon trial or guilty plea, end quote. Betterman v. Montana, 578 U.S., 437, 441, 2016. Notably, criminal defendants have various constitutionally protected rights during the criminal liability process, including the rights to a speedy and public trial, the right to have a jury decide guilt or innocence, the right to the assistance of counsel, and the right to confront the witnesses against him. Amendment 6. The defendant also has at his disposal many means to defend himself against the criminal charge. He can, of course, seek to hold the government to its burden of proof at trial. And even before trial, in a motion to dismiss the indictment, he might make any number of legal arguments. He can assert, for example, that the government's charging document does not give adequate notice of the charge against him, or that the law he has been accused of violating is unconstitutionally vague. See Hamling v. United States, 418 U.S., 87 117, 1974. U.S. v. Davis, 588 U.S., 445, 451, 2019. Moving on. And by the way, Trump v. United States case, absolute banger. If you haven't watched it, tune into the other parts. They're crazy. He might further claim that the law is unconstitutional as applied to his particular conduct. See United States v. O'Brien, 391 U.S., 367, 376, 1968. And he might maintain that his conduct, even if proved, does not violate the law at issue. See Fisher v. United States, 603 U.S., looks like redacted, 2024. The defendant may also raise an attempt to prove affirmative defenses that, quote, excuse conduct that would otherwise be punishable, end quote. Dixon v. United States, 548 U.S., 1/6/2006. Generally speaking, affirmative defenses are determinations, often adopted by legislation, that certain conduct otherwise punishable by law is justified. This might be the case, for example, when the legislature determines that, under specified circumstances, the societal harm particular conduct causes, quote, the societal harm particular conduct causes, quote, is outweighed by the need to avoid an even greater harm, end quote. P. Robinson, Criminal Law Defenses, 24A, 1984. Importantly, a defense is not an immunity, even though a defense can likewise result in a person charged with a crime avoiding liability for his criminal conduct. Consistent with our foundational norms, the individual accountability model adheres to the presumption that the law applies to all and that everyone must follow it. Yet, the model makes allowances for recognized defenses. I don't know why I just couldn't hit that. One such defense is the special privilege that government officials sometimes invoke when carrying out their official duties. All of this to say that our government has long functioned under an accountability paradigm in which no one is above the law. An accused person is innocent until proven guilty, and criminal defendants may raise defenses, both legal and factual, tailored to their particular circumstances, whether they be government officials or ordinary citizens. For over 2 centuries, our nation has survived with these principles intact. Doesn't sound good. Part B. With that understanding of how our system of accountability for criminal acts ordinarily functions, it becomes much easier to see that the majority's ruling in this case breaks new and dangerous ground. Ooh, I think this is going to be one we want to copy. Let's get that down here. Departing from the traditional model of individual accountability, the majority has concocted something entirely different. A presidential accountability model that creates immunity and exemption from criminal law, applicable only to the most powerful official in our government. Applicable only to the most powerful official in our government. I don't know if it is. I don't even know if she's right on that. That might be worth reading. What the actual wording is, because my understanding, for anybody who's along for the no aim assist, my understanding of the majority's opinion here is that they actually did give more than that. It's not explicitly written out, but you can pretty much tell, at least from the way I read it, that in any challenge in the future, it would be very easy for this immunity to extend beyond them. So only applicable to the most powerful official in our government. I don't know. I maybe office or maybe branch, but I don't know that it is limited to him. Maybe this is her saying she hopes it is, but at least how I understand it, I'm not sure. But it'll be interesting to see. We have our question marks. No aim assist. We don't listen to nobody. We go back and we check. So, how does this new presidential accountability model work? An initial problem is the lack of clarity regarding what this new model entails. The majority announces only its most basic contours. See ante at 6, asserting that, quote, the nature of presidential power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office, end quote. Instead of no immunity, the individual accountability model, or an unqualified grant of absolute immunity for, quote, all official acts, end quote, brief for petitioner, 44, emphasis added, the majority purports to adopt something of a hybrid. It holds that a former president may or may not be immune from criminal prosecution for conduct undertaken while in office, to be determined on a case-by-case basis. According to the majority, whether a former president is immune depends on how his criminal conduct is classified as among 3 possible categories. This is the wild part, and especially because they gave this decision, and so Trump came in asking for one, hey, can I get this limited bit of immunity? If you didn't impeach me, can you make sure that I don't get criminally charged after that? Like, they didn't get the impeachment. Like, you got to get one to get the other. Boom, boom. That's what he argued for. They said, no, we're going to give you more than that. So the argument here is they get to determine on a case-by-case basis what is official and non-official, I think is what they're going to go into. But official and non-official being determined by this court who gave out this decision. So it's pretty wild. To me, it gives the game away. I don't know about anybody else, but to me, it gives this decision kind of gives the game away. First, with respect to any criminal conduct relating to a president's, quote, core constitutional powers, end quote, those subjects, quote, within his, another quote, conclusive and preclusive, and that quote, constitutional authority, end all quotes, the president is entitled to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. Second, expanding outward from this, quote, core, unquote, regarding all other, quote, acts within the outer perimeter of the president's official responsibility, end quote, the president is entitled to, quote, at least a presumptive immunity from criminal prosecution, end quote. Third, if the criminal conduct at issue comprises, quote, unofficial acts, there is no immunity, end quote. Applying the majority's new presidential accountability model thus seems to involve bearing down on the indictment's allegation and making a series of determinations about the nature of the conduct at issue. From the structure of the paradigm, it appears that the first decision point is whether the alleged criminal conduct involves one of the president's, quote, core, unquote, powers. If so, and apparently regardless of the degree to which the conduct implicates that core power, the president is absolutely immune from criminal liability for engaging in that criminal conduct. God damn. That's a banger. That is what I understand it to be. That is no different. That's what I believed it was. If not, then one must proceed to consider whether the conduct qualifies as an, quote, official, unquote, act, or, in another quote, quote, unofficial, end quote, act of the president. So we're just going to read that without the quote so it just comes across smooth. If so, and apparently regardless of the degree to which the conduct implicates the core power, the president is absolutely immune from criminal liability for engaging in that criminal conduct. Repeating, if not, then one must proceed to consider whether the conduct qualifies as an official act or unofficial act of the president, of that president. If the crime is an official act, the president is presumptively immune from criminal prosecution and punishment. But even then, immunity still hinges on whether there is any legal or factual basis for concluding that the presumption of immunity has been rebutted. Alternatively, if that charged conduct is an unofficial act, a determination that, incidentally, courts must make without considering that president's motivations, see ante at 18, which is just wild. You can't look at the motivations when you're doing any of these investigations. The president is not immune. So we're going to read that without the quotes. Alternatively, if the charged conduct is an unofficial act, a determination that incidentally courts must make without considering the president's motivations, the president is not immune. Part 2. The majority's multi-layered, multifaceted threshold parsing of the character of a president's criminal conduct differs from the individual accountability model in several crucial respects. For one thing, it makes it next to impossible to know ex ante when and under what circumstances a president will be subject to accountability for his criminal acts. For every allegation, courts must run this gauntlet first, no matter how well documented or heinous the criminal act might be, which is wild. We're just going to pull these bangers as they come. Make sure we have them. Then we can just do a little findy. Moving on. Thus, even a hypothetical president who admits to having ordered the assassinations of his political rivals or critics, or one who indisputably instigates an unsuccessful coup, ID at 41 through 43, I feel like that's a good one, has a fair shot at getting immunity under the majority's new presidential accountability model. That is because whether a president's conduct will subject him to criminal liability turns on the court's evaluation of a variety of factors related to the character of that particular act, specifically those characteristics that imbue an act with the status of, quote, official, end quote, or, quote, unofficial, end quote, conduct, minus motive. In the end, then, under the majority's new paradigm, whether the president will be exempt from legal liability for murder, assault, theft, fraud, or any other reprehensible or outlawed criminal act will turn on whether he committed that act in his official capacity, such that the answer to the immunity question will always and inevitably be, it depends. Ugh. What better way to say, oh yeah, it just goes with like the whims of the court. Oh yeah, this court that decided this super crazy ass decision, they just get to make these decisions in the future. Hope that they're super fair about it. It depends. Ha 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 ha. It's super funny. It's super funny. Moving on. Under the individual accountability paradigm, the accountability analysis is markedly less convoluted and leads to a more certain outcome. None of the same complications or consequences arise because, as I have explained, there are no exemptions from the criminal law for any person, but every defendant can assert whatever legal arguments and defenses might be applicable under governing law. Since no one is above the law, everyone can focus on what the law demands and permits and on what the defendant did or did not do. No one has to worry about characterizing any criminal conduct as official or unofficial in order to assess the applicability of an immunity at the outset. The majority's new presidential accountability model is also distinct insofar as it accepts as a basic starting premise that generally applicable criminal laws do not apply to everyone in our society. Yeah, that's pretty fucking wild. In the majority's view, while all other citizens of the United States must do their jobs and live their lives within the confines of criminal prohibitions, the president cannot be made to do so. He must sometimes be exempt from the law's dictates depending on the character of his conduct. Indeed, the majority holds that the president, unlike anyone else in our country, is comparatively free to engage in criminal acts in furtherance of his official duties. That point bears emphasizing. Immunity can issue for presidents under the majority's model, even for unquestionably and intentionally egregious criminal behavior. Regardless of the nature of or the impact of the president's criminal conduct, so long as he is committing crimes, quote, pursuant to the powers invested exclusively in him by the Constitution, end quote, or as needed, quote, to carry out his constitutional duties with undue caution, end quote, referring to the opinion above. He is likely to be deemed immune from prosecution. Ultimately, the majority's model simply sets the criminal law to one side when it comes to crimes allegedly committed by the president. Before accountability can be sought or rendered, the judiciary serves as a newfound special gatekeeper charged not merely with interpreting the law, but with policing whether it applies to the president at all. Also, under the new presidential accountability model, the starting presumption is that the criminal law does not apply to presidents, no matter how obviously illegal, harmful, or unacceptable a president's official behavior might be. Regardless of all that, courts must now ensure that a former president is not held accountable for any criminal conduct he engages in while he is on duty, unless his conduct consists primarily, and perhaps solely, of unofficial acts. Holy shit. We're going to clip it. It's the end of her part 2. She's got a part 3. Putting out bangers. The structure and function of the two accountability paradigms are not the only differences. The models also assign different roles to participants in the criminal justice system, and they likely ultimately generate different relationships between the presidency and the rule of law. Under the individual accountability model, duty-bound prosecutorial officers initially exercise their discretion to decide whether to seek punishment for alleged violations of criminal law, a determination that is made based on numerous factors. And even if prosecutors decide to bring a charge, a jury of the criminal defendant's peers ultimately determines whether that defendant, including a former president, will actually be held to account for having engaged in unlawful conduct, after the court has resolved any legal challenges and has instructed the jury as to the requirements of the law. By contrast, under the majority's new presidential accountability paradigm, what a prosecutor or jury does may not even matter, since the courts take center stage once charges are brought against a former president, marshaling their resources to conduct a complex and amorphous threshold immunity evaluation. Whether a former president will be entirely exempted from the dictates of the law, such that the roles of other participants in the criminal justice process become irrelevant, requires a judicial assessment in the first instance of his criminal conduct and the circumstances under which he acted. Finally, and most importantly, recall that under the individual accountability model, an indicted former president can raise an affirmative defense just like any other criminal defendant. This means that the president remains answerable to the law insofar as he must show that he was justified in committing a criminal act while in office under the given circumstances. In other words, while the president might indeed be privileged to commit a crime in the course of his official duties, any such privilege exists only when the people, acting either through their elected representatives or as a member of a jury, determine that the former president's conduct was in fact justified, notwithstanding the general criminal prohibition. Under the majority's immunity regime, by contrast, the president can commit crimes in the course of his job, even under circumstances in which no one thinks he has any excuse. The law simply does not apply to him. Hold on. Under the majority's immunity regime, by contrast, the president can commit crimes in the course of his job, even under circumstances in which no one thinks he has no one thinks he has the excuse. Yeah, because he's not answerable to anybody. He's a king. That's the thing. When you don't have any checks on him whatsoever, and you can just break the law with impunity, that's what you have. That's what you're left with. The law simply does not apply to him. What a banger. What a banger tweet. Unlike a defendant who invokes an affirmative defense and relies on a legal determination that there was a good reason for his otherwise unlawful conduct, a former president invoking immunity relies on the premise that he can do whatever he wants, however he wants, so long as he uses, quote, official power, end quote, in doing so. In the former paradigm, the president remains subject to the law. In the latter, he is above it. Whoa. Boom. Moving on. Justice Sotomayor has already warned of the dire consequences that are likely to follow from the majority's decision in the case. I have thus far endeavored merely to explain what today's ruling amounts to on a theoretical level. The court's abandonment of the individual accountability model as applied to the presidents and its introduction of a new presidential accountability model that authorizes the judiciary to exempt presidents from punishment under law depending on the official or unofficial character of the criminal conduct at issue. Ooh. Sorry. Don't want too many voice breaks on here. Audio's already bad enough. I apologize. Here, I will highlight just two observations about the results that follow from this paradigm shift. First, by changing the accountability paradigm in this fashion, the court has unilaterally altered the balance of power between the three coordinate branches of our government as it relates to the rule of law, aggrandizing power in the judiciary and the executive to the detriment of Congress. Second, the majority's new presidential accountability model undermines the constraints of the law as a deterrent for future presidents who might otherwise abuse their power to the detriment of us all. Consider the structural implications of today's decision from the standpoint of the separation of powers. Until now, Congress's laws passed by the representatives of the people bound the people and their elected officials just the same. Law, we have explained, quote, is the only supreme power in our system of government, and every man who by accepting office participates in its functions is only the more strongly bound to submit to that supremacy and to observe the limitations which it imposes upon the exercise of the authority which it gives. End quote. Lee 106 U.S. at 220. With its adoption of a paradigm that sometimes exempts the president from the dictates of the law when the court says so, this court has effectively snatched from the legislature the authority to bind the president or not to Congress's mandates, and it has also thereby substantially augmented the power of both the office of the presidency and itself. Self-call out. She's name dropping herself. Whoop, whoop. Just kidding. This is actually really sad sometimes. Sorry. It's fun to laugh, but I'm not laughing. As to the former, it should go without saying that the office of the presidency, the apex of the executive branch, is made significantly more powerful when the constraints of the criminal law are lifted with respect to the exercise of a president's official duties. Man, it's so crazy. Just hit me now, like how many people told me that this was not a big deal. Like, oh yeah, they're always immune. Everybody knew this, man. I just don't think that's true. After today's ruling, the president must still, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, end quote, Article 2, Part 3. Yet, when acting in his official capacity, he has no obligation to follow those same laws himself. But whatever additional power, hold on, let me get that. Boom, boom. Boom. But whatever additional power the majority's new presidential accountability model gives to the presidency, it gives doubly to the court itself. Again, name drop. She's such a classy broad. I'm just kidding. She is classy. I apologize. Moving on. For the majority provides no meaningful guidance about how to apply this new paradigm or how to categorize a president's conduct. For instance, its opinion lists some examples of the, quote, core, unquote, constitutional powers with respect to which the president is now entitled to absolute immunity, a list that apparently includes the removal power, the power to recognize foreign nations, and the pardon power. However, the majority does not, and likely cannot, supply any useful or administrable definition of the scope of that, quote, core, end quote. For what it's worth, the Constitution's text is no help either. Article 2 does not contain a core powers clause, so the actual meets and bounds of the, quote, core, end quote, presidential powers are really anyone's guess. Nor does the majority explain how to consistently distinguish between official and unofficial acts. Quite the opposite, in fact. While acknowledging that it is a critical line that courts must draw in order for its new accountability model to work properly, the majority simultaneously cautions that making this distinction, quote, can be difficult, end quote. Holy shit. That's wild. I'm sorry. I'm not obviously not reading anymore. She's not dropping holy shits in here, but that's just such a crazy thing to put in the opinion. And she's quoting them like, oh yeah, we know it can be difficult to figure out, like, we know we're making this groundbreaking thing about how to deal with laws in our nation, but it can be difficult sometimes. So really think about it real hard. Let's not stick with our clear thing that has worked for so fucking silly. So fucking silly. Sorry. We're gonna. The majority simultaneously cautions that making this distinction, quote, can be difficult, end quote, likely a gross understatement given the recognized, quote, breadth of the president's, another quote, discretionary responsibilities, and that quote, under the Constitution under the Constitution and laws of the United States, end all quotes. The majority likewise provides no guidance as to when, how, or why the president's, quote, presumptive, end quote, immunity for non-core official acts might be rebutted, saying only that applying the criminal law to a president's acts must pose, quote, no, another quote, danger of intrusion or authority on the authority and functions of the executive branch, end all quotes. Quoting Nixon v. Fitzgerald, 1982. It's so crazy how they quote that, and in that Fitzgerald case, it says, in the Sotomayor opinion, it says clearly everybody knew that they were talking about civil and not criminal. This new criminal thing that they're referencing that Nixon Fitzgerald one, it does not apply here. In fact, it goes the opposite fucking way. And if you want to see more on that, watch my last video. At most, to distinguish official from unofficial conduct, the majority advises asking whether the former president's conduct was, quote, manifestly or palpably beyond his authority, end quote. Blasingame v. Trump, 2023. But that test can be illusory, as in evidenced by the facts alleged in this very case. With respect to the indictment's allegations concerning petitioners' attempt to assemble false slates of electors in conjunction with the events of January 6, 2021, yes, finally, somebody talks about those fake electors is fucking insane. For example, the majority admits that the, quote, alleged conduct cannot be neatly categorized, end quote, and that, quote, the analysis therefore may prove to be challenging, end quote. You fucking cowards. With that, at least, I could not agree more. Holy shit. What do you mean you could not agree more? You could agree more. I don't like the way that's written. You could agree more. You could say, you just call this shit out for being absolutely dog shit. You know that's still an option, right? Like, they could just not be dog shit. They could just not lie to you. Because I bet my thought on this and a lot of this stuff, because there was the opinion, which we may go back through a couple of them. So like, comment, subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do if you want to come back. But, and you want to see more. The big one that I think they made a deal on was... there was a Supreme Court case not long before this one came out where the whole deal was they came out unanimously and said, it was the Colorado Supreme Court one. That's what it was. It was keeping Trump off the ballot for the, I should know which, the insurrection clause, whatever that is. They made the decision there that that's not self-acting. There would have to be like something else from Congress. We can definitely read more into that if we need to. But that, I think, was them making a deal behind closed doors. Hey, we'll kind of give this, we'll make the court look unanimous, like we're coming across as like, stable. We have our things, our ducks in a row. And then the promise was to Sotomayor and Jackson and Kagan, hey, we know it doesn't feel good, taking a loss. He's going to end up on the ballot and you're just going to have to let it go. We're not going to get into this. We aren't going to start this precedent of doing it, but we'll owe you one. And I bet they fucking took that. And that's the thing. You can't fucking trust them because they just lie as easy as they breathe. Like, you can't trust these people. So if they do something like that, like these justices, you just can't trust it in the future. You can't make those deals or anything like that. Or you make those deals, Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson, and then you do the swindling. You do the swashbuckling. Let's stop getting fucking played, because it felt so much when that came out and it was a unanimous decision. It felt so much like a deal behind closed doors of like, hey, things are starting to get really fucking wild. If you make a deal with us, we'll make a deal with you, and then we'll come across as a unanimous court. People will think that it was really well thought out, that sort of thing. Maybe we should give it a read just to see how well thought out it was. From my understanding, it's dog shit, absolute dog shit. It's around the same one as this, where it's just like, yeah, you guys were saying in your opinion, you didn't want to do this because the fucking Republicans are so goddamn crazy that they'll just do it to everybody forever. And that is not a way to make decisions. Oh, we're afraid because the crazy party is going to be crazy some more. Tough titties. That's what you got to do. Sorry, that was a big old rant. We're hopping right back in. Justice Jackson dissenting. This much is clear. Before today, none of these kinds of inquiries was necessary for criminal liability to be fairly assessed with respect to persons accused of having engaged in criminal conduct. And frankly, none is needed now, except as it relates to the president under the new paradigm the majority has crafted. Perhaps even more troubling, while Congress, the branch of our government most accountable to the people, is the entity of our Constitution tasks with deciding, as a general matter, what conduct is on or off limits. The court has now arrogated that power unto itself when that question pertains to the president. Yeah, it's a fucking crazy power grab. It really is. If you're reading in the lines here, this is a crazy power grab for the court as well. So it's not just a crazy power grab for the executive. It's not a, hey, give me a little immunity, give them a lot of immunity. It's also, hey, let's steal a good bit for the court as well. In essence, The court has now imposed its own pre-clearance requirement on the application of Congress's laws to a former president alleged to have committed crimes while in office. Who will be responsible for drawing the crucial, quote, line between the president's personal and official affairs, end quote? To ask the question is to know the answer. A majority of this court, applying an indeterminate test, will pick and choose which laws apply to which president by labeling his various allegedly criminal acts as, quote, core, unquote, quote, official, end quote, or, quote, manifestly or palpably, end quote, beyond the president's authority. Ironically, then, while purportedly seeking to transcend politics, the court today displaces the independent judgments of the political branches about the circumstances under which the criminal law should apply. Effectively, the court elbows out of the way both Congress and prosecutorial authorities within the executive branch, making itself the indispensable player in all future attempts to hold former presidents accountable to generally applicable criminal laws. God damn. That's a banger. And then there's a quote. There's a quote coming up too. Banger and a quote. Quote, the framers, however, did not make the judiciary the overseer of our government, end quote. Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer, 343 U.S. 579, 594, 1952, Frankfurter J. concurring. To be sure, this court may sometimes, quote, have to intervene in determining whether authority lies as between the democratic forces in our scheme of government, end quote. But it has long been understood that, quote, we should be wary and humble, end quote, when doing so. The majority displays no such caution or humility now. Instead, the court today transfers from the political branches to itself the power to decide when the president can be held accountable. What is left in its wake is a greatly weakened Congress, which must stand idly by as the president disregards its criminal prohibitions and uses the powers of his office to push the envelope while choosing to follow or not existing laws as he sees fit. We also now have a greatly empowered court, which can opt to allow Congress's policy judgments criminalizing conduct to stand or not with respect to a former president as a matter of its own prerogative, which is fucking scary. Just going to copy the whole document over. Moving on. If the structural consequences of today's paradigm shift mark a step in the wrong direction, then the practical consequences are a 5-alarm fire that threatens to consume democratic self-governance and the normal operations of our government. That's scary. 5-alarm fire. The majority shoos away this possibility. At 37, referenced accusing the dissents of, quote, striking a tone of chilling doom that is wholly disproportionate to what the court actually does today, end quote. But Justice Sotomayor makes this point plain, and I will not belabor it. Yeah, it's pretty fucking wild. It's pretty fucking wild. There is no actual, from what I've seen, and I'll read it again if people want to see it. You feel free to comment if that's what you want to see. The majority's opinion does not address any of these points. They say, oh, you're being crazy, oh, doom and gloom, oh, whatever. People say this is normal. This is not normal. Don't let them make you think that it's normal. It's not. This is crazy, and it was crazy when it came out. It's crazy when they were deciding. It was crazy that they took the question and did this with it. It's a bonkers decision. So don't let anybody tell you that it's not. And to have truly just no engagement. This is the playbook for the other side. Just truly no engagement. Some very, very few will, and I'm trying my best to find people that will. But the majority just won't won't touch this. It's insane. They just, oh, well, you're crazy. Oh, you're doom and gloom. Oh, you have deranged, blah, 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 blah. No actual factual, hey, I can do this. I bet it's just being tired of, oh, every time I come up with something that's bullshit. But it's not my fault you don't know how to read. The stuff is here. You can do it. Here, I will merely observe that from a theoretical perspective, philosophers have long considered deterrence to a key justification for adopting and maintaining systems that ensure accountability for criminal conduct. For that same reason, some commentators also maintain that decreasing the certainty of accountability for wrongful acts at least arguably reduces incentives to follow the law. At the very least, you could argue that, right? Under the individual accountability model, because everyone is subject to the law, the potential of criminal liability operates as a constraint on the actions and decisions of everyone, including the president. After today, that reality is no more. Consequently, our nation has lost a substantial check on presidents who would use their official powers to commit crimes with impunity while in office. Like I said, we're taking the whole document. I'm sure I'll worry about condensing this down at a later time. And when I say that, I mean not. Just going to leave it this giant fucking text block. Moving on. So one might ask, what remains of accountability for presidents under law? With today's paradigm shift, the majority leaves in place only the chance that this court might someday determine that the criminal conduct in question was an, quote, unofficial, end quote, act, or that the government will somehow rebut the presumption of immunity that applies to a president's official acts such that the criminal consequences might attach. But with the parameters of official and unofficial conduct unknown, I think it highly unlikely that a sitting president would feel constrained by these remote possibilities. All of this leads me to ponder why, exactly, has the majority concluded that an indeterminate, quote, core, unquote, versus, quote, official, end quote, versus, quote, unofficial, end quote, line drawing exercise is the better way to address the potential criminal acts of a president. I'm going to read that without the quotes just so it's smooth. All of this leads me to ponder why, exactly, has the majority concluded that an indeterminate core versus official versus unofficial line drawing exercise is the better way to address potential criminal acts of a president? Could it be that the majority believes the obviously grave dangers of shifting from the individual accountability model to the presidential accountability model might nevertheless be offset by the great benefits of doing so? J. Bentham, A Fragment of Government and an Introduction to the Principles and Morals of Legislation. W. Harrison, 1948, referenced, arguing that acts can be justified by the maxim that, quote, it is the greatest happiness of the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong, end quote. Emphasis deleted. Some of the majority's analysis suggests as much. As far as I can tell, the majority is mostly concerned that without immunity, presidents might, quote, be chilled from taking the, quote, bold and unhesitating action, end that quote, required of an independent executive, end all quote. The court's opinion candidly laments that application of the law to presidents might not be even-handed and that, as a result, presidents might be less, quote, vigorous, end quote, and, quote, energetic, end quote, as executive officers. But that concern ignores or rejects the foundational principles upon which the traditional individual accountability paradigm is based. Well, worse still, promoting more vigor from presidents in exercising their official duties and presumably less deliberation invites breathtaking risks in terms of harm to the American people that, in my view, far outweighs the benefits. Damn, she's a fucking soothsayer. It's like crazy. This whole bit is just, hey, there's probably some use. I know that there is some use. The civil part of the immunity that has existed or it has been understood before for civil action taken against people, which can be more frivolous. You don't want a president thinking about that every single time they have to make a land dispute or they have to recognize a country. You don't want them having to do that. But this point that she's making here and the incentives the backstop of the criminal law being there to make you think about doing things is probably useful. Having more time to deliberate, having more time to think about it, rather than what we're seeing now, this kind of ping-ponging back and forth, this kind of ricochet back and forth as far as policy. This is insanity. Insanity is compared. But you don't have to worry about any criminal consequence. You do literally anything you want, and it's all in the scope of what's allowed as long as this court is the way it is. It's a little bonkers. She knew. And that doesn't mean she's smart. It must mean she's a witch, right? That's how we do. This is not to say that the majority is wrong when it perceives that it can be cumbersome for a president to have to follow the law while carrying out his duty to enforce it. It is certainly true that, quote, a scheme of government like ours no doubt at times feels the lack of power to act with complete, all-embracing, swiftly moving authority, end quote. Youngstown 343 U.S. at 613, Frankfurter J. concurring. But any American who has studied history knows that, quote, our government was designed to have such restrictions, end quote. I was worried I wouldn't know that, but I do. I'm just kidding. Our Constitution's, quote, separation of powers was adopted by the Convention of 1787 not to promote efficiency, but to preclude the exercise of arbitrary power. The purpose was not to avoid friction, but to save the people from autocracy, end quote. Myers v. United States, 272 U.S. 52 293, 1926. Brandeis J. dissenting. Having now cast the shadow of doubt over when, if ever, a former president will be subject to criminal liability for any criminal conduct he engages in while on duty, the majority incentivizes all future presidents to cross the line of criminality while in office, knowing that unless they act, quote, manifestly or palpably beyond their authority, end quote, they will be presumed above prosecution and punishment alike. But the majority also tells us not to worry because, quote, like everyone else, the president is subject to prosecution in his unofficial capacity, end quote. This attempted reassurance is cold comfort, even setting aside the fact that the court has neglected to lay out a standard that reliably distinguishes between a president's official and unofficial conduct. Why? Because there is still manifest inequity. Presidents alone are now free to commit crimes when they are on the job, while all other Americans must follow the law in all aspects of their lives, whether personal or professional. The official versus unofficial act distinction also seems both arbitrary and irrational, for it suggests that the unofficial criminal acts of a president are the only ones worthy of prosecution. Quite to the contrary. It is when the president commits crimes using his unparalleled official powers that the risks of abuse and autocracy will be most dire. So, the fact that, quote, unlike anyone else, the president is, end quote, vested with, quote, sweeping powers and duties, end quote, actually underscores rather than undermines the grim stakes of setting the criminal law to the side when the president flexes those very powers. The vision John Adams enshrined in the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, quote, a government of laws and not of men, end quote, speaks directly to this concept. Mine Workers 330 U.S. at 307 Frankfurter J. concurring in judgment. Adams characterized that document as an homage to the rule of law. It reflected both a flat, quote, rejection in positive terms of rule by fiat, end quote, and a solemn promise that, quote, every act of government may be challenged by an appeal to law. Jesus, I can't read. Quoting, every act of government may be challenged by an appeal to law at 308. Thanks to the majority, that vision and promise are likely to be fleeting in the future. From this day forward, presidents of tomorrow will be free to exercise commander-in-chief powers, the foreign affairs powers, and all the vast law enforcement powers enshrined in Article 2, however they please, including in ways that Congress has deemed criminal and that have potentially grave consequences for the rights and liberties of Americans. Holy bejesus. We're just going to steal that one real quick from my boy John Adams. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome, welcome. We're here every Saturday. Moving on. To the extent that the majority's new accountability paradigm allows presidents to evade punishment for their criminal acts while in office, the seeds of absolute power for presidents have been planted. And, without a doubt, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Oh, what a banger. Quote, if one man can be allowed to determine for himself what is law, every man can. Holy shit, that's a banger. That's a banger. Couldn't agree more. What a banger. That's an absolute... We're going to reread that. That whole string is good. I'm just going to copy all the way down here. I'm just going to trust. Before I even reread that part, I'm just going to trust. And without a doubt, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Quote, if one man can be allowed to determine for himself what is law, every man can. That means first chaos, then tyranny, end quote, at 312. Likewise, quote, if the government becomes a lawbreaker, it breeds contempt for law. It invites every man to become a law unto himself. It invites anarchy, end quote. That's a banger. I was saying literally the same thing. Oh my gosh. I wrote down like almost the exact same thing the other day. That's like insane. Insane how close that was. That's a banger. Olmsted, 277 U.S. at 485. Brandeis, J. dissenting. I worry that after today's ruling, our nation will reap what this court has sown. Holy shit, that's a banger. That's a really good paragraph. If you ever get a chance to learn how to read, and you know who you are, you know who I'm talking to. Stated simply, the court has now declared for the first time in history that the most powerful official in the United States can, under circumstances yet to be fully determined, become a law unto himself. As we enter this uncharted territory, can't even read. As we enter this uncharted territory, the people, in their wisdom, will need to remain ever attentive, consistently fulfilling their established role in our constitutional democracy and thus collectively serving as the ultimate safeguard against any chaos spawned by this court's decision. For, like our democracy, our Constitution is, quote, the creature of their will and lives only by their will. Cohen's v. Virginia. Damn, that's a banger as well. We're just getting all these. Just copy the whole document, Chris. You want the whole document. So just take it all. God, that's such a banger. And this is her call to action. This is her saying that the law, if the law is no longer going to apply and people are going to break the law with impunity, you have to do what the founding documents ask of you as the people. This is your call to action. It's stated right here. Stated simply, the court has now declared for the first time in history that the most powerful official in the United States can, under circumstances yet to be fully determined, become a law unto himself. As we enter this uncharted territory, the people, in their wisdom, will need to remain ever attentive, consistently fulfilling their established role in our constitutional democracy, and thus collectively serving as the ultimate safeguard against any chaos spawned by this court's decision. For, like our democracy, our Constitution is, quote, the creature of their will and lives only by their will, end quote. Need the consent of the people to be governed. For my part, I simply cannot abide the majority's senseless discarding of a model of accountability for criminal acts that treats every citizen of this country as being equally subject to the law as the rule of law requires. That core principle has long prevented our nation from devolving into despotism. Yet the court now opts to let down the guardrails of the law for one extremely powerful category of citizen, any future president who has the will to flout Congress's established boundaries. In short, America has traditionally relied on the law to keep its presidents in line. Starting today, however, Americans must rely on the courts to determine when, if at all, the criminal laws that their representatives have enacted to promote individual and collective security will operate as speed bumps to presidential action or reaction. Once self-regulating, the rule of law now becomes the rule of judges, with courts pronouncing which crimes committed by a president have to be let go and which can be redressed as impermissible. So, ultimately, this court itself will decide whether the law will be any barrier to whatever course of criminality emanates from the Oval Office in the future. The potential for great harm to American institutions and Americans themselves is obvious. Damn, dog. These are hardcore bummers, bro. Bummers. Bring out the cool shit. Bring out the parade, Chris. Bring out the party. What the fuck? Why is it so down for? Don't worry, we're about to pick it up. We're going to do a little video review here in a little bit. Watch a little something, something. Maybe play a little something, something. PlayStation Network just came back up, so we might edit the stream info after this. Ugh. Because sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you need a break. But here we go. The ending part after the stars. The majority of my colleagues seems to have put their trust in our court's ability to prevent presidents from becoming kings through case-by-case application of the indeterminate standards of their new presidential accountability paradigm. I fear that they are wrong, but for all our sakes, I hope that they are right. In the meantime, because the risks and power the court has now assumed are intolerable, unwarranted, and plainly antithetical to bedrock constitutional norms, I dissent. God damn. God damn. And isn't it crazy that this shit's just out here? And that is all of the dissenting opinions. If people want to see it, we can always do the main decision, but I already read through it and it's a bunch of dog shit and they don't address any of these points. So if you have a reason why any of these points would be addressed and you feel like you can do a better job than the Supreme Court or their the majority opinion in this case, or their interns or whoever the fuck does their work, if you feel like that, please come talk to me about it. I would really love to talk to you about it because you're the first person that's been able to do it. If you are the person